Welcome to CPR Saved My Life. Here we share real stories of survival, resilience, and the power of CPR. But remember, I'm a CPR instructor, a paramedic, and a heart health advocate, not a doctor. This show is for education and awareness, not medical advice. Always consult your healthcare provider for medical concerns. Now, let's get into today's inspiring story. Over 500,000 people suffer cardiac arrest each year, and less than 10% of them survive. These are their stories of survival. Welcome to CPR Saved My Life, the podcast and YouTube show where we spotlight incredible stories of survival from those who've experienced sudden cardiac arrest. I'm Medic Manny, and each episode we explore how CPR, AEDs, and fast response can turn the tide between life and loss. Today I'm speaking with Brian McNeill, a survivor, author, family man, and passionate advocate for CPR, first responders, and second chances. His journey from a peaceful day at the park to the edge of life and back is a story of strength, family, and deep gratitude. Brian, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know, all of these journeys start off a lot the same. It always starts off as a very normal day in people's lives. And so I want to know what your normal was. You know, let's take it back a little bit and talk about where your journey started and what your life was like before, what you did, and what your family was like before your cardiac arrest.
Yeah, we are so fortunate to live really a pretty idyllic mountain life here in Salida, Colorado. My family moved here in 2015. And so it's just been the kind of place where we get to do a lot of outdoor play during the summer at the Arkansas River, during the winter, snowboarding at Monarch Ski Area. But prior to that, I grew up in Colorado. My wife grew up in Colorado. We met in high school. We were 16 years old. I was a junior. She was a sophomore. We went to school for 4 years in Chico, California, and then immediately back to Colorado to get married. We've been married since 2002. And we've got two beautiful kids, and my daughters are now just recently turned 11 years old, our youngest, and soon to turn 15, our oldest. They are, yes, it's, obviously we're going to talk about how scary cardiac arrest is, but being a parent to teenagers is something else. So
that's what I hear. I don't have the experience, but that's what I hear.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they are truly the lights in our lives, and just such an incredible part of this story, and of everything that was happening beforehand and everything that has happened since. I think both of them are reasons for me. I'm a professional teacher, have been since 2008. And having them in my lives, understanding what teaching is like from the perspective of being a parent as well, has changed everything for me. But at the time of my cardiac events, I was actually teaching in prison, which is just a whole different experience. I've taught in a lot of different public school settings. I'm currently a special education teacher at a small public charter school. And teaching in prison was the most unique teaching experience I've ever had by far. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was really incredible. I met some amazing people through my time in the joint.
I can imagine. I love the way that you say that. My mom's a teacher, and we teachers are so precious. We know that. And you have to be very passionate in order to do that job. And I could only imagine in the jail system. I wonder how many parallels it runs to the public education school system in so many ways. But it takes a special person, and that tells a lot about who you are.
Yeah, I would say there are a lot of similarities. the amount of profanity I encountered on any given day was maybe a little bit higher. But other than that, I had a lot of really dedicated students. And just like every teaching experience I've had, I would say I learned as much from being with the students as they could ever learn from me. So it's a joy in my life to get to do this, to be a teacher every school day. So yeah,
That's awesome. And, uh, you know, when we talk about cardiac arrest and how it changes people's lives, it can often set a different trajectory, but you're still teaching, right?
I am still teaching, and honestly, especially at this point in my life, being a special education teacher, I have a really unique understanding through everything that happened to me medically, really about the most major brain effect that I've had. And we'll get deeper into this. I lost my ability to read due to a stroke, and I've gained that back to about, I would say, 60% of where I was before that stroke. And I understand what it is to have a reading disability.
Wow,
And that has,
completely different perspective.
oh yeah, it's absolutely changed everything about my perspective on working with students who have, these blocks that they're just born with, to being able to take in information the way that I took so for granted for so long. I understand the work that has to go into trying to get that to a level where one even feels comfortable with what they can do. So yeah, it didn't change my trajectory necessarily in terms of changing professions, but it certainly has updated my philosophy of education.
That's and that's beautiful that you can make good out of such a horrible situation. And I want to talk about that because, again, people talk about it being a very normal day that changes suddenly. And we call it sudden cardiac arrest because it happened suddenly. And in your case, you started having some medical issues before you even had the cardiac arrest, that kind of were the precursor that led to ultimately you having your cardiac arrest event. So let's go back to that day in the park. You called it Riverside Park, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I was going to say, it goes right back to that idea of living an idyllic mountain life. My father-in-law was visiting. We went out to lunch and we went across the street to Riverside Park to see there was a concert going on at the bandstand they have there. And we sat down, started listening to the music, and all of a sudden my foot started to hurt. I kind of felt like somebody putting a vice on my foot and just slowly tightening it down. And so I got up and I started trying to walk it off, and it wasn't getting better. We got home and saw that my foot was basically changing colors. It was going really pale. So we went to the ER here in town, and I remember they did some imaging of it, and I'll never forget. The doctor came in and he said, there's something that is blocking your popliteal artery, and we need to get you out of Salida to Colorado Springs. So we have an ambulance lined up to get you moving right away. And I swear he walked out the door and turned right back around and he said, an ambulance just isn't going to do it. You're taking a helicopter. And so that was my first helicopter ride.
Quick, it sounds like.
Yes. I think what they realize, a blockage in a vein is obviously a major concern. It can make its way to the lungs, create big problems there. This was a blockage in an artery. So all of the oxygenated blood trying to get to my foot was
Not
being
happening.
lost. So
It's
yeah,
like
they were
your foot was dying, basically.
exactly.
And so
And
fast that happened. There were no signs prior to that, no aches or pains, or it just
the only pain was the one that I started experiencing at that concert, and yeah, everything just really ramped up very quickly from there. Um, and that was July 21st, 2018. And really, from that point, things would have appeared from the outside as if they were continuing to be normal from there until about September. But in that time, I was having just weird neurological symptoms. I was sleeping all the time. I would just walk into a room and kind of forget for a second who I was and why I was there. And what we know now is that I was experiencing a series of strokes. And basically, what had happened was I was born with a malformed aortic valve. And in 2016, it was replaced, and the replacement valve had been infected. And the infection was growing material that my surgeon called vegetation, and the vegetation was just breaking off and ending up stuck in arteries all around my body.
And so, one of the things that they usually identify when people are having clots is not necessarily, what's happening to your leg, because obviously that's a big problem that your foot is essentially dying, but also that why are we having blood clots?
Yes, yes.
And that's where, as a clinician, our in a clinical standpoint, that's where we go straight towards is, the leg is the after effects of what the real problem is, and that's where are those clots coming from. And so often it could be an arrhythmia. Atrial fibrillation, we talk about that a lot because people do suffer that, and it just doesn't allow the blood to pass through the body the way that it's supposed to. So when blood sits still, it creates clots. They attach to things, grow bigger. But in your case, it wasn't an arrhythmia. You had a previous heart valve problem, which is, again, another really big problem when we see blood clots is that blood's not moving the way it's supposed to because those valves aren't working the way that they're supposed to. So that was kind of what led into your series of blood clots.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it really came down to that infection. It was just, um, I mean, really, it was destroying the valve. It was destroying the aortic arch, or not the aortic arch, sorry, the aortic root. It had destroyed parts of one of my coronary arteries. And so on October 1st of 2018, I had a surgery to replace the valve. And the surgeon going in said, I know there's damage. I don't know the extent of the damage. And having been through an aortic valve replacement already in life, I knew, it took about 6 hours, I think, from start to finish. My surgery to replace the infected valve ended up being a 14-hour marathon surgery. Um,
And this is back in Colorado Springs where they flew you to.
no, sorry, that's after that flight, I had gone home for a bit. And we actually drove to UC Health in Denver because that's where my cardiac team has been located basically since my 20s. So we just went down there and because we didn't know what was going on, we just kind of showed up at the ER in Denver and it was like, uh, we need some answers. We have no idea what's happening here. So it's easy looking back now, having all this time to kind of Monday morning quarterback everything that happened. The pattern is there, but you don't know that the pattern's there until you have time to analyze it afterwards. So
And your wife talks about that in the book about just wanting an answer and being in this kind of dark place where something is obviously seriously happening. They helicoptered you somewhere and had to take care of things like that's not a minor thing, and not being able to have immediate or not even immediate a little any answers in that moment. Your wife talks about how stressful that was, how emotional that was. Uh, it's frustrating, but at the same time, so scary.
yeah, it's indescribable the fear of it. And honestly, I almost missed. We checked into the hospital on September 10th, 2018, and I didn't have surgery until October 1st because on September 15th I had a heart attack in the hospital. It's same idea. A piece of that vegetation broke off, entered one of my coronary arteries, caused a block, and so I had this MI, myocardial infarction, and that is where we ended up using a medication that breaks up clots called TPA. I'm sure you've had it before on ambulances and things, but
We'll put some information about TPA here on the screen.
Well, and it's an amazing drug. It was used to break up the clot that was in my leg. That was in part why we chose it as the pathway to go with my heart attack. But it's such a powerful blood thinner that because of some of the other damage that had been done in my brain, because of what we now know were strokes caused by this infection, I actually had a hemorrhage. And that was the stroke that took out my reading. That's how they knew I had a stroke. They were showing me three-letter words and I couldn't make out letters. I mean, there was just nothing left.
Well, how scary in the moment to, be deteriorating what seems very rapidly, but not. It sounds like it took a long time for all. It was a lot of time passed while all this was occurring.
Well, and you brought up, the experience of my family, and I think that's really the most important part of all this. Honestly, uh, from the point that I started having that hemorrhage to after my surgery and after being on life support after my surgery, I don't have really any memories. So you can take basically from September 16th to pretty close to middle of October. So about a month. I have very little of what was going on during that time, but my family was experiencing everything. And, it's like first I'm having a heart attack and they're told this is really bad. Then I'm having a major stroke and they're told this is now worse and he's more critical, and I'm getting wheeled around to different, intensive care units and things like that. And I'm not really aware, but my whole family, my wife's family, everybody is aware of every step along the way and just how critical things are. Um, and honestly, I don't really experience any of it until after what we thought was the worst of it was over.
That's what's even scarier about this is that the clots are happening, that they're forming, and the problem with these blood clots is not necessarily the clot itself, it's where the clot ends up. And the most critical things being up in the brain, which would cause a stroke, into the coronary arteries of the heart, which is going to cause a heart attack, or even into your circulation of your lungs, into one of the pulmonary arteries or veins, which can then, compromise your breathing and circulation. It's your the powerhouse of your body. And so those are the three obvious things that we are concerned about. And then there's important but less serious things like a leg or where we will see some of those other clots end up. But you can have mini strokes. We call them transient ischemic attacks, where it's not a full blown stroke that cripples somebody immediately. People can have TIAs and have like that moment that you talked about, where it was just kind of like felt a little weird, things were off, and then it went away. And that's what a TIA does: is it happens but resolves on its own without really any treatment, not necessarily needing the TPA or the medications that you had to go in to do to break up the clot. Because when there's clots, it's like plumbing. You either got to go in and roto-rooter and take some stuff out and fix the pipes, or you can put some Drano and help dissolve those clots, which is essentially what TPA does in the body. It's scary, all of that happening, and your family just having to watch it happen.
Well, and it's amazing some of the things that you're talking about. The amount of learning that has happened for me from a medical perspective, because we went in and we said, like I said, I was having these weird neurological effects, like walking into a room and just kind of forgetting who I was for a little bit. And so we talked to the doctors afterward and we said, we've read some about TIA. Is that what this is? They took us back through the brain imaging and they said, no, if you watch, like it's a brain MRI with contrast. And so you're going layer by layer in there. And he said, sometimes we're going to go from layer to layer and you're going to see this little dot kind of light up on the layer. He said, that is a stroke. He said, if there was a TIA, you wouldn't have that in the imaging because it does resolve on its own. He said, what you're experiencing is a full blown stroke, but one where like the neuroplasticity of the brain allowed it to make connections around the damage that was there so that you didn't really experience long-term negative effects. And I
What an
see it now.
incredible thing the body can do, right?
Yeah.
It does that in the heart too, where, if there's a block, your body really starts to grow other veins and arteries to detour around that block. Body's an amazing thing, but it is limited, you
Yes.
know? It's very limited, which is probably what's going to lead us into, the next parts of your story, where this is continuing to get worse and worse and worse. And you still haven't even gotten to cardiac arrest yet.
Yeah.
So it's really scary. But when did things escalate from, the blood clots to cardiac arrest?
Well, I honestly, I could say that the first experience I had of cardiac arrest was, I said I had that 14-hour marathon surgery, and as my surgeon was closing my chest, my heart truly stopped. I went into like asystole, and yeah, so he reopened my chest and actually hand massaged my heart, like basically direct hand to heart CPR.
It's manual CPR where you're literally just in your chest, squeezing your heart and trying to use it as a pump to keep moving blood around.
And as he did that, they hooked me up to uh, ECMO, which is the most advanced life support system that we have available at this time.
It's like an external heart, basically, where they put it into a machine that continues to circulate the blood and create pressures and all the things that needs to happen. It's an amazing advancement in cardiovascular care. It's been around a long time, but the way that it has advanced recently is truly, truly amazing that we can do that. So they put you on ECMO, and we're keeping you alive by machines.
Yep, keeping me alive by machine for 4 days. And so that all happened between October 1st and October 5th of 2018. And my heart appeared to be strong enough to beat on its own. And so I came off ECMO and, spent a lot more time afterwards still in intensive care, closely monitored, just, making sure that I would actually be safe to go home. And I think I was released from the hospital sometime right around October like 25th ish. And Kelsey and I stayed. Denver's about 3 hours driving from here. So we stayed in Denver for another couple of weeks, just to be close, have follow up visits, make sure everything was moving in the right direction. And then just after Halloween, we made our way home. I think we got home to Salida on November 2nd. And after all of that, we kind of felt like, we're past this and ready to move forward with just recovery.
So your family now obviously is probably retelling you a lot of what happened those previous months and weeks. How's your family doing at this point?
It's so mixed, like anything that is full of big emotion. They were ecstatic that I was alive. I ECMO, even with the advances in ECMO, it has a 50% survival rate. So, all of us are kind of looking at life and going, wow, we're coin toss away. And so they were ecstatic about that, but they were terrified. I mean, they were afraid all the time that things were going to slip back into something worse. And my kids were just young enough at the time. We're talking coming up on 7 years ago now. So they were 4 and 7, um, maybe 4 and 8. But they were just young enough that they knew they were scared. They knew everybody else was scared, but they didn't quite understand why everybody was scared.
Yeah. They couldn't grasp the reality of what it was,
Yeah.
which is a blessing, but also as a kid, so scary to have to go through. Um, now, this, as we know, this wasn't the end of your journey. So, what happened once you got home, and what were those next weeks and months like after that?
So I think really the most important thing, like I said, we got home November 2nd. And then in that first week of being home, Kelsey and I were doing normal parent things. We were taking the girls to school, picking them up, going grocery shopping, trying to just pick up around the house and really planning for my long-term recovery. So planning out what cardiac rehab was going to look like, working with care in our town to make sure that there was follow-up. Because all of this was caused by infection, I was still doing like long-term IV antibiotics. And so I just had a line in all the time, and we would hook up these little balls of penicillin, and they would infuse over the course of a couple hours. But I was going in every couple of days just to have the line changed out, make sure that it wasn't getting occluded or anything like that, and be able to keep the medication flowing smoothly.
So to say you're at home resting and recovering is probably wasn't the case.
Yeah, it's not quite as restful, but honestly, I was feeling pretty well, like I was on the way to recovery. And because I did still need a lot of rest, we called my parents probably on November 7th. They live about 3 hours away from us, the other direction from Denver. And we just said, hey, yeah, we're home and I'm exhausted. Can you come for the weekend and help us with the girls and just help, make sure that we're still getting back into life comfortably? And so they came to town, and I think that probably the next most important thing was we woke up. Kelsey and I woke up on November 10th, and just like any other normal day, we were up and around. It was a Saturday. We needed to get some groceries, so we went outside. We live on a little cul-de-sac here. We talked to some neighbors, and we went to Safeway, got some groceries, got some things for lunch. 100%. Absolutely. I mean, the only things that maybe weren't normal about it, that I was still walking around with staples in my chest from the surgery, that I had this line in for antibiotics. Everything else about it seemed 100% normal. We got home from the store. Um, it was about lunchtime, so Kelsey started making me some lunch. I sat down on the couch with my dad. It's a Saturday in the fall, college football day. He and I sat down to watch, I think it was CU and Oregon State. And game was not going well. And the next thing my dad knew, I was slumped over on his shoulder. And he reached over and he said, "Hey, it's all right, bud. They'll get him next year."
No, he thought you were just sad about the game.
Yes.
Oh,
And then when I didn't take my head off his shoulder, he turned to take a look and he said, "Your eyes were open, but you were not there."
there. So this is the moment your heart stopped. Um, Obviously, you're not going to remember what happened next. Uh, but as we know, in order for you to be here talking with us, there was a series of things that had to happen, which we call the chain of survival, which I'm sure you're familiar with by this point. So tell us how that all played out afterwards.
So what I know now is that my dad immediately started checking for any signs of response, just looking for, is there anything that he can find? My mom worked in a medical lab for decades. And so she had hospital experience. She came over, started feeling for a pulse, not really finding much of anything, immediately started to get on the phone to 911. I think one of I really struggled with the term miracle for a long time, because so many miracles are not as they are miraculous, but they take a lot of work to be put in place to be able to be miraculous. And one of the pieces that I can now see is we were four adults in this household, four adults, two kids that weekend. All four adults were CPR trained. So obviously, I'm not doing a whole lot with my CPR training in that moment, but I had three people ready to go to save my life. And my dad hadn't been retrained. He had taken one training once, but it was enough to set him on the right path. So he started with his hands on my chest like this. My mom said, slow it down. We're going to get the hands on top of each other, kind of lock in your elbows, make sure that you're letting your body weight do the work. And he started compressions.
And that's just that little piece of your dad jumping in because of instinct and what he remembers, and then your mom correcting and coaching. Is actually something we teach in the basic life support class is not to just do the compressions, but as a team, making sure that we are monitoring those things, push harder, push faster. I mean, we have our cardiac monitors on the ambulance now that scream those things at us when we're not doing it effectively. Again, those are key things that were in place that led to your survival. And so your dad's doing the CPR, your mom's on the phone with 911 and coaching. What else is happening?
So one of the things that again I know now was really important, dad was yelling his count. So he's, they've got 911 on speakerphone next to him. He's yelling out his count so that the dispatcher can say, speed that up, slow that down. He's getting the kind of feedback that I know monitors give at this point, and he's getting it in real time because of that kind of team effort. So, you've got like the three people immediately there as part of that team. The dispatcher is part of that team. And we were super fortunate. So dad and my wife, Kelsey, alternated compressions, but we had about a 5-minute EMS response.
Which is a very good EMS response
Yeah, it was
compared to
amazing.
the national average of EMS responses. So the fact that they were there fast also tells how quick your family was to respond and call for help. And again, those key things in those chain of survival that as long as they are in place and happen effectively will end up most of the time with much better results than them not being in place or not having been done.
Yeah, I mean, the response and the team effort in all of it. Again, it's we got the chance to Monday morning quarterback this. I'm very fortunate to be here, and I can look back and see the pattern of how it worked together to make sure that I had a chance. When EMS arrived, they brought in a Lucas device. And for those listening, if you have never heard of a Lucas device, um, number one thing, take a look on YouTube, look up Lucas device, and be ready. First off, it can be traumatic looking at, especially if you've had any CPR experience. But it's basically a CPR robot.
Yep, the automatic compression device is what we call it. Yeah.
And so they had that on me. This is within probably 6 minutes of me going into VFib.
The Lucas was on you, pumping your chest.
Yeah.
That as a paramedic, it gives me chills. I have chills because that's what we train for. That's why we do what we do. Because when we see these things in place, we know the difference in outcomes because we see the difference in outcomes. And the Lucas compression device, and we'll put some pictures and stuff up so you guys can see this in real time, but definitely go look them up. There's a Lucas device, there's the auto pulse, there's lots of different variations of these automatic compression devices that we're using, not just on the ambulance, but in the hospitals as well to do the CPR because they're so effective. And in a time of fear of AI and robots, like this is the good stuff that can come out of some of this technology, and it's truly saving lives. And just to hear that it was in place so fast is almost like a movie, you know, a story in a movie because everything is happening the way that it should.
Well, and it's really imperative because I can tell you, I have a printout of the report from Chaffee County EMS from the time that they took over care to the time that they handed off care at my local ER. And their report starts, I believe it's at 2:47 p.m. And that is the point where they got the Lucas on and got it started. That report continues with compressions happening with that device until they turned over care at 3:40 p.m.
Wow.
So between that and the 5 minutes that my family was doing compressions, nearly an hour of CPR compressions. Uh,
Were you being defibrillated during this time too?
yeah, they had brought along. They ended up actually with two different life pack monitors. So we did not have a true AED. We didn't have the kind of thing that you're going to find when you go to Walmart and, something is needed. They're going to have in place that AED. These are, professional monitors that are carried around on ambulances. Um, and within that report, from the time that they came to the time that my care was turned over at the hospital, which I was not out of VFib at that time yet. EMS shocked me 15 times.
Oh gosh. Wow. 15 times. And the reason we have to do that is when we shock somebody, it's because the electrical the electricity in the heart is misfiring. It should follow a conduction pathway, just like the electricity in your house. And for some reason, lots of reasons, the electricity can start to misfire. And so the fact that they were being able to defibrillate you over and over is a good thing, because we don't shock people who are flatlined. Once you have flatlined, there is no electricity. It's like someone cut off the electricity to the house. So you can shock it all you want. Nothing's going to happen. It's not going to restart with the electricity the way that it would when you're in a shockable rhythm, like ventricular fibrillation or ventricular tachycardia, where your heart is not pumping because the pathway is not the way that it should be, but there's still electricity firing. And so the heart really quivers when that's happening. And what we're trying to do with the shock is, get it to go again. And your chances of successfully defibrillating are going to diminish very rapidly as time goes on. But with good CPR, your window of opportunity opens up. And the fact that they were doing good CPR and all those things were in place tells to the fact that they were able to shock you 15 times, which means that they were keeping your heart alive long enough to be able to shock it 15 times, which we usually do every 2 minutes. So that can tell you like you went a long time. And although 15 sounds like a lot, that's a good thing that they were able to keep, shocking you. So once you got to the hospital, you were still pulseless.
I was still without a pulse. I was still in VFib. And so I'm going to get ahead of us a little bit here just to say I live in a small town. I know my heroes. I see them in the community. I talk to them. One of my paramedics, as a teacher, I learn CPR. I re-up my certification every 2 years. And one of my paramedics teaches my CPR class.
Wow. So you're like truly connected to your first responders in a very personal way.
Yeah. And the first time he was in class, I didn't realize who he was right away. And so I saw that he was wearing a Chaffey County EMS hat, and I walked up. I said, "Hey, are you with Chaffey County EMS?" And he looks at me. He's like, "Yeah." And I said, "I don't know if you know this, but you guys saved my life." And he says, "I don't know if you know this, but I was there." So he went on to tell me this story after they had turned over care. So, then they stop keeping the report and the ER starts keeping the reporting going. So that's why I don't have any of the other shock information after that, because I've never asked for the report from the ER. But he said, I was still in the room with you. We were still going over everything that had happened with people there. But he said, I realized everyone left the room except for me and one nurse. And he said there's only one reason that people all leave the room together. And he says because they're talking about things that they don't want everyone to hear. He said I knew they were talking about how long they could sustain this care. And there does come a point when it just doesn't appear as though the patient's going to respond.
Those are tough conversations to have when you've been seeing something in this. I've worked in and out of the hospital, and at a certain point, we can do a lot. We can keep your lungs breathing. We can keep your heart somewhat functioning by compressing it. We can give you lots of medications, but that doesn't mean that. Even if we do get a pulse back, that you're going to be neurologically intact, especially after that amount of time. Your chances of really surviving cardiac arrest without CPR diminish, about 10% every minute that goes by. So after 30 minutes, now you're wondering, like, what is the quality of life going to be like for this person when we do get a pulse back? And it's a hard conversation to have, and scary to even watch unfold. In real time. So the fact that you were able to hear that story from the first responders' point of view really is touching. It really provides a lot of perspective.
It's incredible. He went on to tell me, he said, I knew what they were talking about. I knew they were going to stop care. The life pack was still connected. You still had pads on. He said, I didn't say anything. I didn't say clear. I didn't tell the nurse I was going to do it. He said, I just reached over and pushed the shock button. And he said the nurse turned around and was about to start chewing him out. And they both saw that I was back to a weak, but still back to a sinus rhythm.
My gosh. Well, yeah, because obviously we've handed over care. Once I hand over care as a paramedic, I no longer get to make the decisions as to what is happening. I have to go based off of what the physician in the ER is saying. So that was very. I was going to use a term that I'm not going to use, but that takes a lot of guts to do, and for you to even know that happened is truly remarkable.
Yeah, it's an incredible thing, and I mean, I was floored. I'm about to learn CPR for myself. I'm thinking, okay, I've done this before, but like I'm excited now because I've been through some things of my own. Like it's really personal to me when I get to go to these classes and when I get to learn things, and then to learn something of my own story that I had no idea about. I mean, it just floored me, and I had that realization of how close to the edge I had been.
Thank you for joining us for part one of Brian McNeill's incredible story. In this episode, we saw how CPR, AEDs, and first responders saved his life after multiple cardiac arrests. But stay tuned for part two, where we'll dive even deeper into Brian's journey. He'll share what it was like to be on the edge of life and death, and how a paramedic's refusal to give up on him brought his pulse back. We'll also explore his recovery, his bond with the first responders and nurses who helped him, and his life today, including insights from his book. Don't miss it. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more life-saving stories. See you next time here on CPR Saved My Life.